Rain pounded through the canopy like machine gun fire. The jungle was a blur of mud, smoke, and screaming radio static. "Command's cut off. We've got 280 pinned beyond the ridge," someone yelled, voice cracking through the storm. The men ran in all directions, shouting, slipping, dragging ammo crates through knee-deep muck. In the chaos, one figure moved the opposite way. A woman, small frame, soaked through, boots caked in red mud, a medical pack twice her size strapped to her back. A young corporal barked out, half joking just to mask his fear. "Hey, Doc. You sure you're not lost? The hospital's 100 miles back." Laughter broke through the panic, harsh, nervous, ugly. She didn't answer. She only tightened the strap on her shoulder, eyes fixed on the ridge swallowed by fog. The ground trembled again. Distant mortars. Captain Jace Turner squinted after her, disbelief twisting in his gut. "She's not seriously going up there, alone?" No one replied. The rain hissed louder, and within seconds her silhouette vanished into the storm, carrying nothing but bandages, morphine, and a heartbeat that refused to quit. Hours later, when the radio crackled back to life, Turner would hear a voice on the other end that froze every man in the tent. But we'll get to that. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Leah Monroe never raised her voice. She didn't need to. While others barked orders and cursed the heat, she moved through the outpost like a shadow, calm, deliberate, unseen, until you needed her most. The Pacific jungle had a way of chewing men alive, and at 31, Leah had learned to move with it instead of against it. Every sound mattered. Every breath had purpose. She came from a small town in North Carolina, the kind with one gas station, one church, and a father who still cleaned his old M16 every Sunday. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, never spoke much about what he'd seen, but his silence taught her everything. "Courage isn't noise," he told her once. "It's what you do when nobody's watching." Leah carried that lesson into every deployment. She enlisted at 19, when most of her high school friends were still figuring out college majors. Afghanistan hardened her edges. Long nights in makeshift clinics, dust storms clogging every pore, the smell of blood and sand that clung to her even after the war ended. She didn't brag, didn't complain, just patched the broken and carried the fallen. When her last unit rotated out, the brass reassigned her to a new joint task force in the Pacific. New faces, new ranks, same old assumptions. To most of them, she was just another medic. "Ma'am, stay close to the trucks," one sergeant told her during orientation. "Things can get ugly fast out here." She'd only nodded, hands resting on the straps of her kit. That's when the whispers began. They said she'd been demoted, that she'd frozen up in combat and lost a man. One rumor claimed she was sent here to keep her out of sight, a quiet exile. Leah never corrected them. She just kept her head down and did her job. At night, while the others played cards or swapped stories, she sat under a dim lantern, methodically cleaning her instruments. Her pack was always organized, gauze in one pouch, morphine in another, tourniquets wrapped tight as rope. There was no hesitation in her movements. She'd done this too many times to count. Private Reggie Holt, one of the youngest in the unit, noticed. "She's tougher than she looks," he'd said one evening, watching her stitch a gash in another soldier's arm without flinching. Sergeant Lane snorted. "Tough? She hasn't even seen real fire yet. Wait till bullets start flying, then we'll see who's tough." Leah tied the final knot and handed the soldier his canteen. "You're clear," she said quietly, not even acknowledging the comment. Her calm unnerved them. To them, war was noise and chaos. But Leah carried war differently. In her silence, in the way her eyes scanned a perimeter before anyone else did, in the slight tremor that passed through her hands only when she was alone. They didn't know her past, couldn't have known. Her service record had gaps, redactions, entire pages blacked out. What no one knew was that Leah Monroe had once dragged 6 men out of a burning convoy in Kandahar. She'd kept them alive for 48 hours with nothing but field bandages and a broken radio. For that, she'd earned the Distinguished Service Cross, but the mission had been classified and her name buried under layers of ink. The brass didn't want her fame, they wanted her silence. So when she arrived here, among strangers who thought she was weak, she didn't correct them. She'd outgrown the need for approval. Still, the disrespect stung. During one patrol briefing, a lieutenant tossed a stack of med forms at her boots. "You're in charge of the Band-Aid Brigade, Sergeant. Don't wander too far into the grown-up fight." Laughter circled the tent. Leah said nothing, just picked up the forms and walked out into the rain. Private Holt muttered, "Sir, that was—" "Relax, kid," the lieutenant interrupted. She knows her place. But that night, while everyone else slept, Leah sat in the medical tent inventorying morphine doses, her eyes distant. Outside, thunder rolled through the jungle like artillery. She whispered something under her breath. Not anger, not fear, just a promise, not again. To her, this wasn't about rank or pride. It was about never letting another soldier die on her watch. She checked her bag one last time, fingers tracing over the small silver coin her father had given her, his old unit challenge coin, edges worn smooth from years of carrying. By morning she was back on her feet before sunrise, her boots already muddy, hair tucked under her cap. The others might not have seen it, but beneath her calm was something unbreakable, a quiet strength forged in places far darker than this jungle. "Have you ever seen someone the whole world underestimated?" the narrator asked softly. "Only to realize later you were standing next to a legend?" Leah moved through the jungle as if she had done it 100 times before. The rain fell in slow, heavy sheets, turning the leaves slick and the soil into sucking mud, but she didn't hesitate. Every step was measured, every pause deliberate. She crouched, scanning the path ahead. Her hand brushed the ground lightly, fingertips tracing a shallow groove that didn't belong, a tripwire half buried beneath leaves. Without a word, she slid a small stick underneath and eased the wire clear, breathing out slowly as the tension released. Not her first time finding one. Not by a long shot. Somewhere in the distance, rifles cracked through the rain. Echoes rolled through the valley like thunder. Leah pressed against a tree trunk, counting the seconds between bursts. Her lips moved soundlessly. Timing, not prayer. Then, without looking back, she raised her hand and made a series of quick gestures toward the tree line, 2 fingers, a hook, and a downward chop. Half a mile behind her, a pair of forward scouts watching through binoculars froze. "Did you see that?" one muttered. "Yeah, she's marking coordinates. But those are coded signals. That's special ops language. Then how the hell does a medic know it?" The next second, a mortar round landed exactly where the enemy gunfire had flared. The burst ripped through the jungle canopy. Perfectly timed, perfectly placed. The scouts looked at each other in disbelief. "That wasn't luck," one said. She guided that strike. Leah didn't hear them. She was already moving again, low, silent, and fast. The rain plastered her hair to her neck, her pack digging into her shoulders with every step. She reached down to tighten the strap and winced when her arm brushed a cut. Without stopping, she pulled out a bandage, wrapped it around her forearm, and cinched it tight. The movement pushed her sleeve up, revealing a faint tattoo, a small black phoenix, wings outstretched, tail trailing into ash. Back at the ridge, a corporal caught the image through his binoculars. "What's that tattoo she's got?" The radio technician beside him squinted, his expression draining of color. "Wait, zoom in." When he saw it clearly, his voice cracked. "No way. That can't be her." "Can't be who?" the corporal asked. "The medic from Operation Firelight." The tech's eyes stayed glued to the blur of movement below. "They said she died in the evacuation. Only one person ever wore that mark, the one who saved 52 soldiers alone when the jungle went up in flames." The corporal frowned. "The ghost medic? That's just a story, man." The tech shook his head. "Not a story, a classified mission. I've seen the debrief. Only one survivor. That phoenix was her unit's emblem. She's supposed to be dead." They both stared at the faint figure crawling through the mist. Meanwhile, Captain Turner sat in the field command tent, static buzzing in his headset. The radio hissed, then cleared just enough to catch a familiar voice, calm, steady, reporting coordinates through the storm. He froze. That voice. He'd heard it before, years ago during training, when instructors whispered about a medic who refused to die, who had carried men out of burning wrecks until her hands were nothing but bandages. The file had been redacted. The name erased. Status presumed KIA. Turner's breath caught. It can't be. He stepped out into the rain, eyes locked on the fog-covered ridge. Somewhere out there, that same calm voice was giving orders no one had assigned her to give. Downrange, Leah paused at the edge of a clearing. Smoke curled low, thick with the smell of blood and gunpowder. A shape twitched near a fallen log, a Marine, wounded and barely breathing. Bullets snapped through branches as she crawled toward him. "Stay with me," she muttered, dropping beside him. His chest rose unevenly, a dark patch spreading under his vest. She tore open her kit, pressed gauze to the wound, and whispered, "You're not dying here, not today." The Marine's eyes flickered open for a moment. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be here." Leah's tone didn't change. "Neither should you." "So, we're even." Another burst ripped past her shoulder, shredding bark. She didn't flinch. She kept pressure steady until the bleeding slowed, then reached for her radio. Grid 257. Airburst. Shift right, 10 meters. The words were crisp, professional, the language of someone who'd lived too long in chaos. From the ridge, the mortar team obeyed without question. The next blast erupted just far enough to push the enemy line back. Leah grabbed the Marine under his arms and dragged him toward cover, her boots slipping in mud. Her breath came sharp but even, no panic, just rhythm. She reached a cluster of roots, lowered him gently, and checked his pulse again. Still there. Barely. Thunder cracked overhead. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in this jungle. She was somewhere else. A burning convoy, the night glowing orange, the screams of trapped men echoing through smoke. Her hands were bloody then too, dragging someone out of wreckage, lungs seared by fire. A flash of memory, gone in an instant. She blinked the past away and refocused. The Marine stared weakly up at her. "Who are you?" Leah tightened the bandage on her own arm and said quietly, "No one important." Then she shouldered her pack again and crawled forward into the gunfire. Back at the base, Captain Turner's voice trembled as he spoke to the radio tech. "You said that medic, the one from Firelight, she was presumed dead?" The tech nodded. "Yes, sir." "But if that's her out there, she's not dead. She's rewriting the record right now." Turner's gaze stayed fixed on the fog. He'd laughed at the legend before, a woman who crawled 3 miles under fire, who refused evacuation until every last man was out. He'd thought no human could survive that kind of hell. Now he wasn't sure. Leah's silhouette appeared again on the ridgeline, dragging the wounded Marine behind her. She stopped only to reload morphine into his arm, then gave another precise signal toward the mortar team, a language few still remembered. Rain dripped from her jaw, her uniform streaked with mud and blood, her wrist faintly glinting with the mark of the Black Phoenix. They thought she was ordinary. The narrator's voice fades low, steady. But every scar told a story no one dared ask about. The first thing she saw of them was fear. It hung in the trees like fog, heavy and bone-cold. 280 soldiers pressed into a half-moon of churned mud and shattered brush, rifles low, eyes higher. The enemy had them pinned from 3 angles, rounds stitching the tree line and chewing bark into needles. Leah slid on her belly through a tangle of roots and vines until the barrel of a rifle stopped an inch from her nose. "Hands!" a corporal barked, voice breaking. "Hands where I can!" He cut off when he saw the Red Cross panel velcroed to her vest. His muzzle dipped, shame catching up to fear. "Doc," he said, swallowing. "Sorry, we thought." "It's fine," Leah answered, already moving. "Where's your CCP?" He blinked. "Our what?" "Casualty collection point," she said, and jerked her chin toward a shallow fold in the ground beyond a blown palm. "There?" He nodded helplessly. We started one. But? Show me. She followed him in a low crouch as fire snapped overhead. The CCP was a scar of earth, 3 ponchos stretched between broken limbs for a roof, a medic bag turned inside out like a carcass. Men lay shoulder to shoulder, boots touching helmets, faces gray with cold and pain and shock. Leah's hands were already moving before her eyes finished counting. She knelt by the nearest chest wound, cut the blouse with trauma shears, sealed the puncture with a vented occlusive, and rolled the soldier into a position that let the lung do what lungs are supposed to do. Her fingers never paused, never doubled back. She checked radial, checked airway, checked pain with a question and then a push of morphine into the line the other medic had somehow found time to start. A round cracked the tree above. Mud showered the ponchos. The kid next to her flinched so hard the vein popped off the catheter. Leah retaped in one motion, thumb and tape and pressure like a magician's trick she'd practiced for a decade in places no camera would ever see. "What happened to your medic?" she asked. The corporal's jaw worked. "Wounded. He's in that corner. We're low on everything." "No birds, no evac, no..." "Breathing?" she cut in, eyes on the chest bouncing too shallow 2 places down. "Barely." Leah slid to the next man. She palpated, listened over the rain and the rage. Tension. She sterilized, chose a space, and decompressed with a practiced pop. The soldier's eyes rolled, then steadied. She squeezed his hand with 2 fingers and moved again. "Where's your PL?" she asked. "Over there," the corporal shouted, pointing to a crouched silhouette behind a half-fallen trunk, radio at his ear, frustration stamped into his face. "Tell him I need security 2 and 6 o'clock, Leah said. "I'm carving a corridor." The corporal nodded and stumbled away, shouting. Leah reached into her pack and yanked out the last of her pressure dressings. She counted them, weighed what was left, and made the call she hated. 2 went to the arterial bleeds. 2 she ripped in half to double the reach. 1 she held back for the moment she prayed wouldn't come. A mortar hit somewhere too close. The world tipped. Leah's shoulders slammed a root, and for a heartbeat the canopy wheeled in slow focus. When she blinked the rain out of her eyes, her left sleeve was red to the wrist. She didn't swear. She didn't sigh. She pulled a tourniquet from her vest, slid it high, and cranked until the pain got bright and useful. The sleeve tightened over the black phoenix like a secret reminding her to keep moving. "Doc," someone yelled, "we got a femur!" She crawled to where 2 soldiers were holding a man who should have been screaming but wasn't, which was worse. His thigh bulged wrong, skin tenting where bone pressed from the inside. "Don't look," she said, which always made them look, and then set to work. She cut pants, aligned, stabilized with a SAM splint, lashing in place with a strip of someone's torn sling. The soldier's breath gritted between his teeth. "You with me?" she asked. He blinked hard. "Yes, ma'am." "Good, you're riding out of here. Understand?" He nodded. He needed something to believe that wasn't the pain. She gave him that, and then she was gone again, already on to the next. Rounds kept coming, not constant, but smart, probing, mean. The enemy was testing for panic. Panic would have given them an opening. Panic didn't find Leah. She grabbed the platoon leader by the elbow as he ducked under the poncho edge. He looked younger up close, eyes raw at the edges. "We're dry on comms," he said. "I can't raise anyone long enough to get 9 line out. And even if I do, the weather." "Forget birds," Leah said. "We're building ground evac to the creek cut. Shortest route with cover. I'll need smoke at 3 points and suppressing fire in staggered bursts, 30 seconds, then lift." "We move the worst first." He stared. Do you have a plan for the indirect?" Leah took his handset without asking. She keyed twice, then spoke into the storm low and even, choosing words that would cut through static like a knife through webbing. "Valkyrie, this is Red Cross Actual," she said. "Authenticate Sierra Echo. Fire mission, danger close." "Grid," she rattled off numbers, then looked past the PL's shoulder at the canopy, calculating drift. "Prox fuse, 2-5. Walk left by 10 on my mark. Mark." Silence. Then a voice, surprised and clipped, answered in a code that hadn't been taught to conventional line units in years. Red Cross Actual, copy. Authenticate, Delta Lima. Leah answered with a string of letters and a number that only belonged in certain ears. The PL's brows climbed. "Who are you?" he whispered. She didn't look at him. "They taught me once." She handed the handset back and pulled a grease pencil from her pocket, mapping in the poncho's sheen as if it were a whiteboard. 2 squads hold here and here. Security on the flanks. We're moving in files of 4. Litter teams at the front and rear. No one runs. If someone drops, the file kneels. You kneel with them, and the world can try to climb over you. The PL swallowed, nodded, then turned and began to repeat her orders as if they were his own. That was fine. He needed the voice. She needed the motion. She went to the CCP and picked 4 for the first move. The femur, the chest, a double arm fracture with arterial bleed controlled, and a man who hadn't opened his eyes since she'd arrived but kept swallowing air like a fish on a dock. She slid a cravat under his jaw to keep the tongue from falling back, checked his pupils again, and tapped his sternum. "Wake up," she said. "We're walking." Her tourniquet burned. Her shoulder sang its own song. She angulated her body so her good side took the weight, then leaned into the first litter as the enemy fire rose like a tide that didn't know it had already hit the shore. "Smoke!" she called. 2 canisters hissed into bloom. White drowned green. Men lifted. Boots found mud and then found it again. "Lift!" she called. "Move!" They pushed into the corridor, as if into the throat of something alive. Rounds snapped at the edges, angry, blind. Leah moved with the litter, keeping her body between the wounded and the places the noise came from. The team to her left shot in controlled pairs, then fell silent for the half-breath it took to let the other side speak for them. The rhythm held. A grenade detonated far right. The file stumbled. Leah dropped, bringing the litter with her without slamming it. She covered the chest wound with her forearm to shield the seal, felt the heat of someone else's fear on the back of her neck, and said, calm as glass, "We're fine. Up on 3. Up on 3. 1, 2, up." They rose. The line moved. Behind them, the CCP filled again, because hell never runs out of customers. Leah got the first 4 into the bowl of earth she'd chosen from the poncho map and pivoted without letting her knees lock. She handed off to the kid with the good hands and worse eyes. "You're in charge of these until I come back," she said. "Check these seals. If they bubble, burp once. If the femur loses pulse, tell me before you blink." "Ma'am, you can," she said, and was gone. The second run began with a scream that ripped the top off the rein. A soldier staggered into view, holding his own blood inside his arm with fingers that slipped. Leah sprinted, grabbed his elbow, and pushed his hand higher, replacing it with her elbow while she wrapped with a pressure dressing. When it soaked through, she reinforced it with the last of the good gauze and a strip of poncho, then tied in a windlass with a snapped branch. It wasn't pretty. "It would hold. Keep that high," she said. "You're walking." He tried to argue. She stared until he shut up and nodded. She moved past him and found the other 3 for the second file. Rounds peppered the trunks ahead, higher now, more frantic. The enemy didn't like the corridor. Good. Leah liked that the enemy didn't like things. She grabbed the handset from the PL without asking and keyed again. "Valkyrie, adjust 8 left, 5 short, proximity maintain. Mark." She sent it as if she were ordering lunch. The reply came crisper. Whoever was on the other end had decided that this voice got what it asked for. She hung the handset back on the PL's chest. He looked at her as if she were an apparition. "You're not just a medic," he said. "I'm exactly a medic," she answered, and pushed the litter forward. Halfway through the second run, a shell went off close enough to slap the breath out of everyone's lungs. Leah's feet lost the ground. She landed hard, ears ringing, mouth full of iron rain. For a second, the world flashed orange, and she was back in a different storm, dragging a man whose name she had never learned through glass that used to be sand. She rolled onto her hip, and found herself bleeding again from somewhere under the tourniquet. Fine. Good. Pain meant she could still count. She stood up. The men around her hadn't moved. Shock freezes. It kills faster than bullets when it gets the chance. Eyes, she said, voice steady, on me. They looked. Good men, all of them, scared and good. We don't run here, she said. We kneel and we move. Up on 3. 1, 2, they lifted. The line moved. She covered a private on the edge with her own body when a burst stitched too close. It caught her vest, rattled the plates, stung her ribs. The private swore like a boy who couldn't decide if he was alive. You're fine, she said, hands moving to reconfirm the tourniquet at his thigh, to retuck the edge of a bandage that had loosened. You're walking. He nodded too fast, then matched her count when she pressed a hand to his shoulder and breathed with him. I am out. In. Out. Rhythm instead of panic. Rhythm wins. The second file reached the bull. She dumped triage to the kid with the steady hands and the big eyes again. How many left? She asked. Too many, he said. Then we go again. On the third run, she found the other medic. He was pale but angry, which meant alive. She pressed a hand to his sternum, looked him in the eyes, and gave him the only permission that mattered. You did enough, she said. I've got it. He shook his head once, then twice, then stopped shaking altogether and nodded. He took 2 patients in sequence and moved them like a man who'd just been given back a job he thought he'd lost forever. They built a rhythm between them. Gather, stabilize, lift, pass, return. The enemy tried to break it and couldn't. Rhythm is a kind of shield when everyone holds it. Between runs, Leah took the radio long enough to speak that old language again. She adjusted fire by the width of a palm and the height of a leaf, bringing the bursts to comb the canopy and shave the teeth off the flanks. The mortar chief never asked who she was again. He just walked rounds where she told him to walk them. On the 4th run, the PL found his voice. He barked orders that sounded like his. He checked corners. Leah didn't have time to check and trusted her corridor like a bridge you don't test because someone already did. You did this before, he said in a lull so thin it barely existed. Pieces of it, she answered. Where? In a place with no map. He looked like he wanted to ask again. He didn't. He had men to move. They moved them. By the 5th pass, rumors had outrun the rain. Men whispered between clenched teeth about the way she counted breaths, about how she never looked away when a man begged, about the tattoo on her wrist that flashed black when she retightened her bandage. Ghost, someone breathed, not loud enough to be a name, just a shape in the mouth. Leah didn't hear. Or she did, and chose to be deaf. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the femur still had a pulse. The chest still rose. The kid with the big eyes had stopped looking at her for permission and started moving before she arrived. The PL stood where he should stand, not in front, not behind, but in the place where his men could see him and the corridor could see him too. A lull came that didn't feel like a trap. The kind of hush you only earn by outlasting a storm instead of outrunning it. Leah used it to recalibrate everything. Dressings, pulses, pain, fear. She took her tourniquet down a quarter turn to give the limb a chance and tightened it back when the color lied to her. How long can we hold? The PL asked. As long as we have to, she said. He stared, then smiled with half his mouth. That's not how they taught it at Benning. They didn't teach this at Benning, she said. Another file, another 4 souls through the throat. The corridor felt real now, like a path that had always existed but needed someone to point at it. Men stopped stumbling. They stepped. They breathed. A private with freckles and shaking hands caught her eye as she passed. Ma'am, he said, voice thin. You're not just a medic, are you? She tightened a strap on his litter and met his fear with something he could hold. I'm the kind who stays, she said. They moved again. By the time the 7th pass ended, the perimeter had shrunk, not from defeat, but because they'd eaten the distance from death to the creek 1 file at a time. The enemy shifted farther out, angry, confused. They were failing to make a point. Captain Turner's voice finally broke through on a cleaner channel, carried like a lifeline on the back of a gust that scattered the fog. Red Cross Actual. This is Falcon 6. Confirm corridor to Creek Cut. Say status. Leah keyed with a knuckle because her fingers were busy doing a more important job. Corridor is green enough. Wounded moving. Ammo low. Morale sufficient. Turner let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Who am I talking to? She watched a pulse under skin that wanted to stop and told it not to. Sergeant, she said. Leah Monroe. Silence clicked. Then the professional came back into his voice. Copy, Sergeant Monroe. Ground CASEVAC en route to Cut. Hold the corridor. Already holding, she said, and clicked off. She turned, lifted another litter with her good arm and her bad shoulder, and stepped back into the rain without waiting to see if anyone was watching. They were. They watched a woman who bled and did not stop, who called in fire like she'd been born with a grid in her head, who turned a kill box into a hallway. The whisper ran through them like current. She wasn't just a medic. She was the kind who had done this before, alone. Ever seen courage that didn't scream? It just acted? Dawn arrived like a bruise, purple at the edges, raw in the center. After 36 hours, the storm finally broke, but the jungle still hissed as if the rain were trapped inside the leaves. Smoke hung low and mean. Charred vines drooped across the creek, cut like black ropes. The ground was a churned mess of heel prints, drag marks, and the hard geometry of footprints that had refused to run. The first reinforcements pushed through the mist with their rifles at high carry and their faces too young for what they were about to see. Behind them, heavier boots thudded in a steady cadence. CASEVAC teams, litter bearers, ammo resupply, commo with a new antenna glittering with dew. A helicopter thudded the distance, not overhead, not yet, but near enough that the sound started to stitch torn nerves back together. Men who had been awake for 2 days straight blinked like they'd forgotten how. Leah Monroe stepped into that thin new light with a soldier hanging from each shoulder. She didn't look like a story. She looked like work. Mud reached past her shins. Blood had dried to rust on her vest in places and shone wet in others. Her left sleeve was dark to the elbow where the tourniquet disappeared beneath it. Her right hand was bare and nicked, the glove lost somewhere on the 3rd or 4th pass when a strap jammed and time decided gloves were a luxury. Her face was the color of the rain, gray, used up, and yet her eyes were clear. Down, she told the litter team that ran to meet her. On my count. 1, 2, down. They lowered the first man into waiting hands. Leah kept the second upright with her hip and shoulder, then eased him onto a poncho that had been pulled tight across a makeshift frame. She checked both pulses without thinking about it and gave the new medic on station a look that was half hand-off, half promise. He decompensated twice, she said, nodding at the first. Chest seals intact, but watch the corners. They'll need burping if he coughs hard. He'll want to. Don't let him. The other splinted. Distal pulse is weak but present. If you lose it, tighten. If you still lose it, call me. The new medic opened his mouth to say, "Who are you?" then decided a better first sentence was copy. Copy, he managed, breathless. Leah turned to go back for more. Captain Jace Turner reached her before she took 3 steps. He had mud up to his calves and a headset hanging around his neck like a collar that had been chewed through by static. His eyes were too wide for his rank. He looked left and right, at the corridor that now felt like a road, at the exit wounds in the trees where mortars had shaved bark into confetti, at the men who swayed on their feet because that was all their bodies would allow. "Sergeant Monroe," he said, and it wasn't a question or an order. It was an announcement he needed to hear in his own mouth to believe it. She glanced at him for the single beat it took to read his face. "Sir," she said. Behind him, reinforcements fanned out. The platoon that had been pinned checked perimeters out of muscle memory, not need. The enemy had withdrawn in the hour before dawn when the corridor refused to die. A few men sank to their knees for no reason, except that their legs had decided the ground was a friend again. "Where?" Turner began, then broke the word in half. He looked at her arm, the sleeve stiff with dried blood. "You're hit." "I'm fine," Leah said, which was partially true and entirely sufficient. "We still have 6 who can't walk, and 3 I won't let try." "You're caseback?" "2 minutes out to the cut," he said. "Birds will hover south and winch." "The canopy is a liar," she finished, nodding. "Good. We'll stage on the rise and feed them in sequence." Turner nodded back, then watched her for a second longer than seemed professional. He didn't mean to, but his eyes dropped to the inside of her left wrist as she reached for her pack strap. A small shape, ink black and rain slick, moved with her pulse. A phoenix. Wings half spread, head turned, tail in ash. Turner's breath missed a step. The cold mist leapt to his throat. He had seen that bird before. Not here, not now. In a page once, in training. In the margin of a redacted brief some instructor had smuggled into a lecture as a dare to reality. He had been a lieutenant then, and full of numbers and distances and the math of war. The instructor had spoken of a night without coordinates, a convoy that burned hot enough to make glass from sand, and a medic who crawled until crawling had a new definition. Turner didn't believe in legends, but his eyes believed in ink. He reached, not to touch, he would never, but to place the thought in the air where he could see it. "Sergeant Monroe, where did you get that tattoo?" Leah's face didn't change. Only her hand stilled for one heartbeat on the strap. "Same place I got these scars, sir," she said quietly. In a fire. The smoke shifted. Some men still a dozen yards away stopped speaking in the middle of their words and stared because something in the air had changed tone. Turner swallowed. The fog seemed to crawl into his lungs and sit there. "Operation Firelight," he whispered, as if saying it too loud might put the jungle back the way it had been. "You're the ghost medic." For the first time in 2 days, a different silence fell. Not the hunted kind, a hush with weight. The nearest soldiers went still. A private who had been asking for water forgot he was thirsty. A corporal who had not slept in 2 nights closed his mouth and put his hand on his friend's shoulder as if to confirm the shoulder existed. Leah looked past Turner to the line of men she had walked in and out of heartbreak with for a day and a night. Their faces were streaked in stone. She breathed once, a long breath that seemed to find what was left of morning in the smoke. "Sir," she said, and the rest of the answer was already in the way she stood. Turner's eyes blurred. Rain, fatigue, something else. A man doesn't name where others can hear it. He straightened, boots steady in the mud, shoulders drawing back as if a weight came off, and another, older weight took its place. He raised his right hand to the brim of his cover. It wasn't a crisp salute. It was a trembling one. It looked like a man returning something overdue. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough. "It's an honor." The word ma'am hung in the air for a heartbeat that felt like a flag opening. Leah returned the salute. No flourish, no apology. Just a straight line through the storm between 2 people who understood the price stamped on those syllables. She let her hand fall first, not from rank, but because there were still men to move. Around them, the shift rolled outward like a quiet wave. The laughter from 2 days ago, the nervous jokes, the tight smirks, and the easy dismissals, all of it looked small now in the glare of simple facts. A soldier who had called her Florence Nightingale stared at his boots as if they had just told him a secret about himself he didn't like. Another who had once asked her to stay near the trucks wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and couldn't find a place to put his eyes. Private Reggie Holt stood as if a wire were pulling him up from the back of his shirt. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stepped to the side of the corridor and straightened, making space for her to pass like men do when a flag moves by. Leah bent to the nearest litter and checked the chest seal again. It held. She touched the man's sternum lightly with 2 fingers, the way she always did when she was about to leave him with someone else's hands. "We're not done," she told Turner without looking up. "That last squad is still 600 meters out. They've been holding on fumes." Turner cleared his throat. "What do you need?" She nodded toward the Casevac team jogging down the cut. "A clean chain. I'll feed you in sets of 4. If a bird flares because the canopy lies again, nobody panics. We kneel and we wait and we move. The corridor knows the way. The corridor knows the way, he repeated softly, as if it were doctrine he wished he'd learned earlier. He turned to his new arrivals, and his voice found steel. You heard the sergeant. LZ will be south side, hover and hoist. Files of 4. Smoke on my mark. If you're not carrying, you're covering. Men moved. Boots found purpose. The hush changed shape again. Not reverence now, not entirely. Something closer to resolve. As Leah stepped, the black phoenix flashed once more, and soldiers who had never believed in symbols before this morning learned one anyway. When the first bird surged into view, the rotor wash tore the mist into ribbons, winch lines dropped. The jungle tried to grab them and failed. Leah coordinated the first lift with 2 fingers and a look. The team obeyed like they'd been practicing together for months. A wounded man rose into the loud, bright wind, face turned sideways, eyes closed like a prayer that had been answered in the exact words he'd spoken. On the ground, Leah moved to the next. Her left arm trembled now, not fear, not even pain, just the bill coming due. She hid the tremor by tucking the elbow tighter to her ribs and using the stronger side to take the weight. Doc, a private said. The same one who'd asked her 3 hours earlier if she was just a medic. He couldn't hold the question anymore. Is it true? Are you? Leah met his eyes gently. I'm the same person I was when you didn't know, she said. We're still getting you all out. He nodded, lips pressed tight, and lifted the litter under her count. They worked until the corridor felt empty. Not safe. A place like this never admits that word, but empty enough that the air changed pitch. Only then did Leah let herself stand still. Turner came back to her with the awkwardness of a man trying to move correctly inside a moment he knows will live past him. He didn't try to thank her. There were not words large enough, and both of them would have hated small ones. He looked at the men who were still here because she had been. He looked at the place where others were not, because no one wins all of it. He looked at the Black Phoenix again and understood the part of the story the brief had left out, that surviving is not the same as being done. Leah adjusted the strap of her pack so it wouldn't bite the same bruise twice. She watched the last litter lift into the rotor wash and disappear into the white. Her face did not break. Her mouth did not smile. She stood in the rain like a flag that had learned to be quiet. Sometimes, the narrator says softly, as the wind from the bird rips smoke into sky, heroes don't wear medals, they carry the weight of those they couldn't save. Dawn bled pale over the tree line, washing the jungle in weak gold and gray. The storm had finally spent itself, leaving behind a hush too fragile to trust. Helicopters thundered low over the valley, rotor blades chopping the mist into ribbons. The sound wasn't war this time. It was rescue. Leah Monroe stood at the edge of the extraction zone, her boots sinking into the soft mud that had claimed almost everything else. Her uniform hung heavy with rain and blood, but her spine stayed straight. Around her, soldiers moved like ghosts, limping, bandaged, eyes hollow but alive. "Birds inbound," someone shouted. 2 UH-60 Blackhawks cut through the dawn haze, touching down in a windstorm of dirt and leaves. The medics rushed forward, shouting over the roar, stretching litters toward the wounded. Leah motioned them through, her voice steady but hoarse. "Move the worst first. Go!" She turned when one medic reached for her arm. "Ma'am, you should get on board too. You're bleeding through your wrap." Leah shook her head. "Not until every one of them's off this ground." The medic hesitated, then nodded, because by now everyone knew arguing with her was useless. One by one, the survivors climbed aboard. Men who, hours ago, had been half buried in mud and fear, now leaned on each other like brothers. Every one of them passed her. Every one of them touched her shoulder or met her eyes. A silent thank you that said more than words could. Captain Turner stepped forward through the wind and noise, helmet tucked under his arm. His uniform was streaked with grime, his voice hoarse from shouting for 2 days straight. But when he saw her standing there, still refusing to rest, Something in his expression broke into something softer. Awe, maybe. Or respect long overdue. He climbed onto a broken ammo crate, trying to be heard over the engines. His voice carried anyway. This woman, he began, pointing to her, carried 48 men through enemy fire, alone. The nearby soldiers turned. Those already aboard the Blackhawks craned to see her. She crawled through hell, Turner continued, and she never stopped. I want every man here to remember her name, Sergeant Leah Monroe. The words cut through the air like a flag being raised. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then someone, one of the younger privates, straightened and saluted. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, the whole platoon stood at attention in the mud, rows of trembling arms raised high despite exhaustion. It wasn't a loud moment. It wasn't even coordinated. It was something purer, a silence that said, "We see you now." Leah froze, eyes flicking across the faces. Men she'd dragged from fire, men who'd mocked her days ago. Now they stood still, their salutes unwavering even as wind and rain whipped their sleeves. She swallowed hard. "They're the ones who deserve it," she whispered, voice almost lost beneath the rotors. Turner heard anyway. He nodded once, solemn. The loadmaster waved her forward toward the final chopper. Leah hesitated. The noise was deafening, the wind fierce, but the men didn't lower their arms. One by one, they stayed locked in salute as she started walking. Every few steps, another soldier joined. Those on stretchers raised a trembling hand. Those leaning on crutches forced themselves upright. A ripple of respect moved through the wounded like a living tide. Leah reached the open ramp and turned. The mist swirled around her like smoke, the dawn catching the edge of her dog tags, the faint shine of the black phoenix on her wrist. For a second, nobody breathed. She raised her hand in return, a simple, quiet salute. The gesture traveled through the ranks like a heartbeat, mirrored by dozens of shaking hands. The engines screamed. The chopper lifted, scattering dirt across their faces. She didn't look away until the ground began to fall beneath her, until the men below turned into silhouettes in the fog. As the helicopter rose, the jungle swallowed the sound, and the salute stayed frozen in memory. The hospital ward smelled of antiseptic and coffee that had been reheated one time, too many. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, tracing a pale glow across white walls lined with beds. Beyond the window, morning sunlight slipped through the blinds, scattering stripes across clean sheets and quiet faces. Sergeant Leah Monroe sat at the far end, her left arm still wrapped in gauze, but her posture as straight as ever. The noise of the ward wasn't chaos anymore. It was laughter, soft and broken, but real. Soldiers she'd carried out of that jungle sat propped against pillows, comparing scars and exaggerating details in the way only survivors could. "You didn't carry me," one Marine argued, grinning through his bandages. "I walked myself out." Leah raised an eyebrow, sipping her black coffee. "You had a broken femur." He shrugged. "Still walked." Another soldier chimed in from across the room. "Yeah, you walked, with her holding most of you." Laughter rolled through the ward, rough and honest. Leah smiled but said nothing, eyes soft with something deeper than amusement. Each voice in that room was proof that what she'd done had mattered. A shadow fell over the doorway. Captain Turner stepped in quietly, his uniform crisp now, but his face still wore the same lines of fatigue and respect. Beside him stood a young recruit, barely out of training, nervous, wide-eyed, clutching a brand-new medic kit like it might bite. Turner stopped near Leah's chair, his tone low but steady. "Sergeant Monroe," he said. "Thought you might have retired after all that." She smiled faintly. "Retirement's for people who stop learning, sir." He gestured toward the recruit. "This is Private Ellis, fresh out of medical training. I figured if anyone could show him what service really means, it's you." The recruit straightened awkwardly, trying not to stare. "Ma'am, it's an honor." Leah studied him for a moment, nervous, eager, hands trembling around his clipboard. She remembered when she'd looked just like that, ready to save the world, unaware that the world doesn't always want saving. She set her coffee aside and motioned for him to sit. Courage, she said, isn't running toward bullets. It's not medals or speeches or even being brave when everyone's watching. Ellis frowned slightly. Then what is it, ma'am? Leah's voice softened. It's not walking away when people need you. Even when you're scared. Especially then. He nodded slowly, eyes serious now. She could tell he understood more than his age suggested. Turner smiled, a small, knowing curve of the mouth. You'll learn more from her than any manual, Ellis. She wrote half the unwritten rules of this job. Leah chuckled quietly. All I did was keep breathing when things got loud. Sometimes, Turner replied. That's the hardest part. He gave her a small nod of respect, the kind of gesture that didn't need ceremony, and stepped out, leaving the recruit in her care. The laughter in the ward died down as the men drifted back into light sleep, the soft rhythm of heart monitors filling the silence. Leah stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from her shoulder. She crossed to the window, looking out at the base where trucks rolled lazily through the morning haze. For the first time in weeks, the air smelled clean. She reached into her duffel bag under the bed and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of travel. The hinges creaked as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a folded strip of canvas, lay a collection of dog tags. Each one carried a name, a story, a memory. Her fingertips brushed over the metal one by one. Some names she whispered, others she mouthed silently because the sound of them hurt too much. Rodriguez, she murmured. Tanner. James. Lee. Each name left a mark in the air, a pulse in her chest. When she reached the last tag, a faded one, edges worn, she held it in her palm and closed her eyes. The room fell away for a moment, and she was back in the rain, the earth trembling under her knees, the smell of smoke and mud thick in her lungs. She took a slow breath and whispered, "We made it out this time." Her hand trembled slightly as she placed the tags back in the box and closed it gently. It wasn't grief that filled her, it was gratitude. The kind that doesn't fade, only settles deeper. The ward door creaked open again. Private Ellis peeked inside. "Ma'am? You coming to breakfast?" Leah turned, smiling faintly.
"In a minute."
He hesitated. "I read about Operation Firelight last night," he said softly. "That medic, the one they called the Ghost." "Was that?" She met his eyes. Stories change in the retelling. Private. What matters is what we learn from them. He nodded and disappeared back into the hallway. Leah sat back down, folding her hands on the edge of the bed, the box beside her. Through the window, sunlight had finally broken through the clouds, spilling across the base like gold on steel. The narrator's voice carried the weight of it all, gentle but unshakable. In every war, some heroes fight without rifles. Their weapon is mercy, their courage, unseen. They don't raise flags or give orders. They kneel in the mud beside the wounded, holding the line between life and loss. True valor isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to keep going when no one's watching. Leah looked around the room one last time. The sleeping soldiers, the empty beds waiting for the next fight, the sunlight spreading like a slow salute. And she smiled. Then she whispered to the silence, as if the jungle could still hear her. "Rest easy, boys. I've got this one covered." Sergeant Leah Monroe never asked for recognition, and she never wanted any, but the men she saved will carry her name for the rest of their lives. Courage isn't always loud or celebrated. Sometimes, it's a single medic walking alone through fire, carrying the weight of 280 souls on her back, and never once looking back for applause. Heroes like her remind us what true service means: quiet strength, endless sacrifice, and compassion born from pain. If you were moved by her story, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories for more true tales of valor and heart. Because these stories, of courage, duty, and honor, keep the spirit of those who served alive for generations to come.